Thank you. As Larry said, of course, Ben got in late with his family yesterday afternoon, and really we didn't expect him to be back here at our services today, so I had volunteered to teach the class. And, you know, I was thinking as I was coming up the road from Gainesboro, the last time I taught this class, gas was $1 plus. That's true. And, you know, that really hadn't been that long. I taught the class here in the auditorium for 2 or 3 years, and thoroughly enjoyed it and benefited from it. And so time does get away, but I'm happy to be able to help the church here at Willow this morning. I want to say something to you probably that you do not know. There's many church polls that are kept by individual firms and companies. We have one of the finest percentages of individuals to stay for Bible study than the national average. And we're very, very happy about that. I'm very enthused when I stand out front after services, and we seem like fewer and fewer that are going out the door and not staying for Bible study. And Ben does a marvelous job with this class, I tell you. Just so thankful to be able to say to him, and listen. And another thing that goes along with those percentages, our Sunday night and Wednesday night attendance above the national average for churches of Christ. So we're very thankful to you that you see the need for being at the church services and learning more about what God's Word is. I want to read you an article to start the lesson. During the war between the states, a young woman learned the truth and obeyed the gospel. Her sweetheart, by the name of J.H. Holbrook, was a Confederate soldier. He was captured by the Union Army and kept a prisoner in Michigan until the war was over. He was then given a ticket to Nashville and $2.50. From there, he returned to Centerville, Tennessee, found what was left of his home and family, and was reunited with his girlfriend when they were married. Mr. Holbrook's new wife studied the Bible with him, and he soon became a Christian. He taught the truth, was so good and so simple that he began to teach and baptize many of his friends and neighbors. Then he began to preach, but he recognized his need for more training. So he enrolled in the Mars Hill Bible School and was taught and trained by the great T.B. Larimore. Many of you will recognize that name, one of the pioneer preachers of our time past. Upon completing his studies at Mars Hill, Mr. Holbrook and his wife chose to move farther south rather than going back to Tennessee, and they went into the counties of Walker, Marion, Fayette, and Lamar counties in Alabama. Among his many converts was a man named Charlie Alexander Wheeler and his wife. Mr. Wheeler, after obeying the gospel, soon began preaching to others. He started more than 100 congregations and baptized more than 6,000 people. But wait, the story does not end there. One of those 6,000 baptisms was my father, the late Gus Nichols. And under my father's preaching, 12,000 people were converted to Christ. And how many of those 12,000 began to preach the glorious gospel of Christ? No one can know the exact number, but I personally know several who did. I am one whom he baptized and encouraged to preach. And under my preaching, about 3,000 have been baptized. Among that number, a few have gone on to preach the gospel. Only eternity will reveal the total results of the teaching of that one girl over 150 years ago. But at least 21,000 people have already become Christians through this single thread in the fabric of that one girl's influence. 21,000. Go and do likewise, it says in John chapter 10, verse 37, for you are important. Just one can be very influential. This article was written by Brother Flavel Nichols, who was Gus Nichols' son. And I thought this was very, very good to lead in to what I wanted to ask us today. This lady had a tremendous influence, evidently. When I stand in front of you this morning, can I ask each of you, how much influence do you have for Christ? Do you leave the building on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night Bible study, and you're concerned with that question that's in your heart? What kind of influence are you having for Christ? I'm following up on what Jonathan just about took my lesson away from me, so I'm going to try to restructure it a little bit. Sometimes that's not easy to do. You know, I think that many of us Christians, we do not realize the power of influence. Influences can be in so many ways that people view us, that we set our standards where people can get what the definition of influence tells us, gets a full idea. What is influence? What's the definition of influence? It's the capacity that you and I each have that affects an individual to the extent of their behavior, their actions, and their opinions. I dare say this morning, as we've come to this part after we started gathering at 9 o'clock, I dare say there has been so many opinions that has been thought of by each of us about something that has taken place up until this time. Opinions. You know, I've been into coaching. I've been the owner of a grocery store for 38 and a half years. And it was one thing that I realized that I had to have in both of those realms of my occupation. I had to have an influence. How do you view your influence in your daily walk? How much do you think about your time that you have spent, for instance, here on Sunday morning, in Bible class, in the worship services? What does someone think of me or you when they meet us in the hallway? You know, most of the times when we look at somebody, we have an idea that comes to our mind, and I may shake hands with them, I may say hello, but something may come in my mind that goes back to a past experience. And we hope that's a good experience. You know, when I gave you just a moment ago those figures, it makes us so happy as eldership to know the percent of people that we have coming back compared to a norm that the Churches of Christ attendance is gathered by. Makes us very happy. But there's more to it, because when we stand in front of Christ on Judgment Day, it's not going to be matter about, you know, I was in the audience with 373 on Sunday morning, May the 29th. That's not going to matter. What's going to matter is what individually our influence has been in regard to the gospel and how we've nurtured that, how we've come along. And you know, I find that as we age and we get farther along in life, that sometimes we sort of back up a little bit. I can never remember, many years ago, 30, 35 years ago, the elders at Gainsborough were asking a former deacon there, would he teach a class? I could not believe the words that I heard. I'm retired. You know, that is something that we as Christians can never let be uttered out unless there is something physically, mentally, or emotionally different for us. It's just something we can never utter. This was very difficult for me to gather a lesson together, especially after Ben has been teaching. You just really know not where to start at. But I wanted to mention something to us this morning that we might could take home with us when we think about every day. There's so many ways for a Christian to let their influence be seen. So many ways. You know, the flip side of this, influence has to be controlled. Influence has to be controlled. It's a lot easier for us to be happy-go-lucky and the first thing you notice, we've said something that we shouldn't have said. We've given the wrong impression. We've made fun of somebody that's just had a happening to happen to them. I feel like my God's going to remember all those things about me if I don't repent for it. But influence has to be controlled. There's a great story in the Old Testament of influence, and I want us to use that this morning for the basic of this class. If you'd like to turn to Deuteronomy Chapter 13, we're going to begin with verse 6. You know, God expects you and I to be a holy individual. We feel like, a lot of times that's a place that we can't grow up to. We've got to try. We've got to continually to try. But let's look at this story that tells us more about God's desire for mankind. Of course, this is in the Old Testament. We don't follow these same kind of rules that we're going to read about here. But let's look at this story and see how strong God expects influence to be positive. Beginning with verse 6. Moses says here, if thy brother, the son of thy mother, or thy son, or thy daughter, or the wife of thy bosom, or thy friend, which is as thine own soul, entice thee secretly. Now listen to this closely. Let us go and serve other gods. If we're enticed to let us go and serve other gods, which thou hast not known, thou nor thy fathers, namely of the gods of the people which are round about you, nigh unto thee, or far off from thee, from the one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth, thou shalt not consent unto him. Thou shalt not consent unto him, nor hearken unto him, neither shall thy eye pity him, neither shalt thou spare him, neither shalt thou conceal him. But thou shalt surely kill him. Yes, that's what it says. Thou shalt surely kill him. Thine hand shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of all the people. And thou shalt stone him with stones, that he die, because he has sought to thrust thee away from the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt and from the house of bondage. And all Israel shall hear and fear, and shall do no more wickedness as this is among you. Now this is the first part of what we've just read. God says that you go and you stone him to death. The reason they used stoning at that time is didn't want to see any blood to be used. Didn't want any other mankind to touch him, to lay hands on this body of such an individual. Now look at as we get into verse 14, verse 12. If thou shalt hear any one of thy cities, which the Lord thy God hath given thee to dwell there, saying, certain men, the children of Belial, are gone out from among you and have withdrawn the inhabitants of their city, saying, let us go and serve other gods which ye have not known. Thou shalt inquire and make search and ask diligently, and behold, if it be the truth and the thing certain that such abomination. Now I want to come back to this word when we finish reading, that such abomination is wrought among you. Thou shalt surely smite the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword, destroying it utterly, and all that is therein, and the cattle thereof, with the edge of the sword. And thou shalt gather all the spoil of it into the middle of the street thereof, and shalt burn with fire the city. And all the spoil thereof, every whit, for the Lord thy God, and it shall be a heap forever. It shall not be built again. And there shall cleave naught of the cursed thing to thine hand, that the Lord may turn from the fierceness of his anger, and show thee mercy, and have compassion upon thee, and multiply thee, as he hath sworn unto thy fathers. When thou shalt hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep all his commandments, which I command thee this day, to do that which is right in the eyes of the Lord thy God. This tells us in the Old Testament the feeling of our God even today, under that covenant, what he told the people to do if they went and worshiped, or they knew of someone worshiping other gods, even towns, to destroy the town, obliterate. And the thing with this here is it was supposed to be to the point to where nobody could benefit from any of the spoils. Couldn't take anything. Couldn't take anything. You know, this word abomination in verse 14 is the strongest word that we find used in the Old Testament. It means impure, unholy, unclean. God is a very, very jealous individual of his people. For us to carry out to the degree of living a holy life, we see it very difficult. But God expects it of us to the extent that we can give it the best effort that we know. There's so much involved about the influence of a Christian. You know, Paul tells us when he was writing the letter in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1, be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. Influence is powerful, so powerful. And at times that we don't recognize it, we can have the worst effect with it. Now, what is influence once again? Influence is a capacity that we individually have that can affect by either our natural attitude, our natural abilities, or with power or with force, the effects of behavior, actions, and all the circumstances that glows from the individual, Leadership has to have influence. Let's think just a moment about leadership in the church. How many leaders in the church, speaking of the church in whole, how many leaders in the church, elders in the church might we know that would be in that position if they hadn't had influence? Most men that we know that are asked to serve as elders are men that are qualified according to the Scriptures, a congregation has known them for a while, they have shown an influence. But there can be an extreme to this also. There can be circumstances where a congregation can just stay quiet on an individual that they question, and that can cause problems. But influence has to affect leadership. I know that we all probably would like to hear this. Mom, thank you for helping us embrace our future. We would not have chased our dreams if it wasn't for your support each step of the way. Through every setback, struggle, or unexpected twist, you have encouraged us to press on and persevere. You supported us even before we knew what our dreams were, as you painstakingly helped us with all the things that we didn't realize that we was going to be encountering in life. More importantly, you taught us the importance of having spiritual dreams and necessity of making our relationship with God the very center of our future. Thank you so much for helping us to become the individuals that we are today. We love you more than words can say. Wouldn't we all love to have, maybe some of you have, words like that worded to us? Of the many decisions that moms and fathers make to help their children get on solid ground, that's a great thing to have sent back to us, isn't it? And I know that many of you have had these kind of things said to you, and that's wonderful. But you know, we are constantly bombarded, if you think with me a minute, of different avenues of influence toward us. Just think for a moment, probably one of the most important ones is when the minister stands in front of us and he challenges us according to what the words say in the Scripture. He's influencing us for the good. There's one area that we're challenged. What about when we go to the doctor and the doctor tells us, now you need to do this or you need to do that? We're being influenced. We may heed what he says. We may not heed what he says. But there's influence. And you know, today and time, there's so much derogatory influence that we see in the news. And I'm going to suggest to you, brothers and sisters, we're getting ready to be in a time to where we haven't seen with the issues that's getting ready to be facing our nation. I see the day coming. I may not live to see it, but I see the day coming for the church that we're going to have a more difficult time. Instead of the leisures that we have today in the tax system, I see that those times aren't going to be as easy in the future as what they are now. We see denominational congregations at this time splitting over the gay issue, the homosexual issue. Your influence is going to be tested in that in certain areas of life. It may be your neighbor. What do you think about that? Did you hear that so-and-so they've had a split? It's happened, May the 1st. In the denominational world. What if somebody asks you, how do you view that? What are you going to say? Influence. We need to be prepared. We need to feel for these people that are in those conditions. You know, there's another great example of influence that we hear quite often in the Scriptures. It's found in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5, where we know the influence that Timothy's mother and grandmother had on him in his ruin. And what Paul used that strength that Timothy had to use him, to take him with him, and to use him, especially to leave him in cities that were very, very difficult to appoint elders in the church. A very, very difficult thing for Timothy to have to deal with. But it's influence. If we, as members of the Lord's church, could find some way to evaluate our influence, if we're satisfied with it, you're the call. But if we feel like there's ways that we can improve our influence for the Lord, that's the things that we need to pray for the strength of the church. The church is into difficult times. Since the pandemic, we all know, we can see what's happened here with the numbers that we have, but other places are far, far greater in absentees than what we are here. We're thankful for that. But we need to salvage what influence we have and grow from there to strengthen the church. And in doing that, we'll strengthen ourselves. I hope we can take this home, think about it. I've learned a lot from preparing for this lesson, and I hope that I can be benefited from it in my walk the rest of the life that I live. But thank you so much for your attendance today. Good morning.